This is why you should always trust your gut. In the 1970s, a young couple decided to go for a late night hike in the woods. A couple minutes into their walk, and the man remembers thinking something's not right. He tells his girlfriend, but they just decide to ignore it and keep going, until he steps on something that felt really soft, like it was alive. Before he has a chance to see what he stepped on, they hear all this rustling in the bushes next to them, and they bolt. Years later, that couple turns on the TV, and a death row inmate who's about to be executed is being interviewed. And they ask him, was there ever a time that you were almost caught red-handed? He responded, yes, one time. I was in the woods, and a couple walked through, and the man actually stepped on the body of a girl I had just killed. I was hiding in the bushes just a few feet away. They didn't see me. That couple had run into one of the worst serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy. 3 American things that I just don't understand. Number 3. Why is your money all the same color? You literally have to read the number to tell which one's which. I don't have time for that. Our money in Australia is color coordinated, which makes it 1, a lot prettier, and 2, so much easier to find the amount that you need. Number 2. Why are your bathroom stall gaps so big? Listen, when I'm taking a shit, I don't like to lock eyes with other people. It is so bloody creepy. I might as well just have the door wide open, because it seems like everybody wants to have a look at how I'm going. Number 1. Why is there so much water in your toilets? Mate, it feels like I'm shitting into a pool. There's just way too much. When I go to clean myself, I shouldn't be worried about dipping me hand underwater. So if you value your life, follow me, Australian mate. This is why you shouldn't go for walks in Sweden. In 2008, a Swedish woman went out for an evening stroll with her dog, but never came back. Her husband went looking for her and found her dead next to a lake. The police immediately blamed her husband and sent him to jail. After a few months, the woman's forensic analysis report came back, and it was clear the husband was innocent because there was all this hair and saliva on the woman's body that was not his. It turns out there is a very strange phenomenon that occurs in Sweden in the fall when all of the apples have fallen off of their trees. Those apples ferment, and then hordes of moose eat those apples, becoming drunk and oftentimes very belligerent, like this drunk moose who got stuck in a tree. The hair and saliva of the killer belonged to a drunk Swedish moose. I love how confident this guy was. In 1731, the King of Sweden was given an incredible gift. His very own lion, who he loved and totally spoiled. Unfortunately, it died young. After a couple of sad years, the king finally decides that he wants to memorialize the lion, so he sends its pelt and the bones to a world-renowned taxidermist. Now, unfortunately, the taxidermist that he sent it to had never actually seen a lion before, and it's 1731, so he can't just Google it. But he doesn't want to let the king down or jeopardize his reputation, so he's like, yeah, send me its bones and pelt. I'll whip you up a lion. This is why parents should believe their kids. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy started to notice that the door to his attic, which was in his bedroom, was always open. One day, when his mom's giving him a hard time about being lazy, he's like, well, you're one to talk. You always leave my attic door open. She's like, I haven't touched your attic door in months, and nobody else has either. Not easily frightened, the boy decides to leave the attic door open. And so he's laying in bed, and he kind of looks over at the door, and standing in the door frame is a figure staring right at him. He bolts, tells his parents, they don't believe him, and then 6 months later they move anyway. A few years later, the boy discovers his favorite teacher actually moved into his old house, and so he jokingly asks her, you ever see any ghosts walking around your attic? Her face got completely serious, and she's like, you know, as soon as we moved in, the door to the attic kept opening, so we investigated and we found a trap door that led onto the roof. Someone had been crawling in through that entrance and living in the attic for years. This is why you should always be afraid of Australia. In 2014, an 8-year-old and her family went on an extended vacation to, you guessed it, Australia. After a couple of days, she started having this horrible recurring nightmare where an alien would appear in her room and try to grab her with its tentacle. After a week of this, she is terrified to go to sleep, but her parents keep telling her that it's just her overactive imagination. One night, she swears she feels that thing grab her leg and she leaps from the bed screaming. Her family runs into the room and they see her hysterical in the corner, and then they look at the bed and they all gasp. It wasn't an alien. It was a 7-foot-long adult carpet python that had been sneaking in through the ceiling tile and into her bed to stay warm every night. Most of you will be guilty of number 3. You're on vacation in Illinois and a local salamander dealer comes up to you and he says, "Hey, can I interest you in buying 76 salamanders?" And you're like, "Actually, that sounds pretty good. I can get a lot done with 76 salamanders. Give me all 76. You fool. 75 is the legal limit. On the last day of your tobogganing trip to South Dakota, you're feeling tired, and so you decide to avoid the slopes that day and hit up the local cheese factory and take a tour. You get inside, you start feeling sleepy, and you decide, you know what, this is a good place to take a nap, and so you do. You fool. It's illegal to nap in cheese factories in South Dakota. It's nighttime and you've just arrived in New Hampshire for the National Spelunking Championship and you're totally stressed about the competition the next day. So you go down to the beach to collect yourself, clear your mind, and you notice a huge amount of seaweed on the beach and you think, maybe I should collect this. And so you do. You fool. You can't collect seaweed at night in New Hampshire. When you finish this video, you're going to Google 2 words. In 1959, 9 very experienced Russian hikers set off on a 16-day expedition into the mountains. 7 days in and some bad weather forced them to make camp about halfway up a mountain. The last pictures of them alive were taken at this campsite. When the hikers never showed up, they sent out a search party who quickly found their campsite, and it was immediately apparent that something horrible had happened to them. All their tents had been slashed open, but from the inside, and inside the tents was all their gear, neatly folded and stacked inside the remains of the tents. No bodies, but 9 sets of footprints walking away from the camp. Using the footprints, they discovered 5 hikers who were only dressed in underwear who had died of hypothermia. They found the other 4 hikers 250 feet away in a riverbed wearing the clothes of their dead hiker friends. They had skull fractures, chest fractures, eyes, tongue, lips missing, and their bodies were radioactive. Official cause of death? Unknown compelling force. When you finish this video, you're going to Google 3 words. In 2014, a German man and his friends went on vacation to a seaside resort in Bulgaria. On the last day of his trip, he got in a fight with 4 other guys over a soccer match, leaving him with a perforated eardrum. A doctor prescribes him an antibiotic and advises him not to fly home the next day with his friends because a change in air pressure could further damage his eardrum. So, his friends take off the next day and he decides to stay one more night and checks into a cheap hotel. That night, his mother gets a distressing phone call from him where in a low whisper he says that 4 men are coming to kill him and that she should cancel all of his bank cards. Footage from that night in the hotel shows him pacing up and down the hallway and even hiding in an elevator. Early the next day, he heads to the airport, but before he goes through security, he does something truly unexplainable that was captured on camera and has been viewed millions of times across the internet. He stops, drops all of his things, turns around and sprints out of the airport yelling, "I don't want to die here," climbs a barbed wire fence, disappears into the forest, never to be seen again. Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange post-it note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that in the same weird handwriting says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector. This is why you should always trust your gut. In the early 1970s, a college student decided to hitchhike his way home after class. A car pulls up, a man offers him a ride, and he climbs in. As soon as the car started moving, the student felt totally uneasy, like something was wrong but he couldn't quite place it. Without saying anything, he waited till the next time they slowed down and he flung the door open and ran away. 2 years later, he's flicking through TV channels when he comes across this special interview with a death row inmate. And it's just the audio recording, so he hears the interviewer ask the inmate, "Why did you remove all the door handles inside of your car?" The man just goes, "Well, the first time I tried to kill someone, I picked up a college hitchhiker who got smart at some point and jumped out of my car. So, lesson learned, remove all the door handles." When they showed his picture, the student knew immediately that he was supposed to be the first victim of John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, who had killed over 30 men and boys in his clown room and stuffed them into his basement. Yes, the picture at the end is real. In 1876, a woman from a very prominent family in Paris goes missing. After years go by and no one has a clue what happened to this woman, friends and family ultimately mourn her death and move on. 25 years later, and this anonymous letter shows up on the Attorney General's desk, claiming that the missing woman's family had a secret. Intrigued by the letter, the police go to the family's home, show it to them, and ask to search the property, to which they say, go for it. They search, they don't find anything, but on the way out, they notice something very peculiar. At the end of some stairs was a door that was padlocked shut. When the family refused to open it, the police break it down and make a horrifying discovery. Cowering on a rotten straw mattress in a pitch-black room was the missing woman, now 50 years old and extremely malnourished. Her mother had imprisoned her there after they had fought over her boyfriend, and she had not seen sunlight or another human being in 25 years. Be careful what you put in your body. In 2014, a couple returned to their home to find it trashed in baffling ways. There was lotion all over the door handles, all of their shoes had had their soles ripped off of them, and someone had dumped an entire can of paint all over the toilet. Despite the obvious break-in, the police come and can't find any evidence of theft, so they leave thinking the couple's not in danger anymore. That night, the couple hears scratching underneath their bed and what sounds like a crying animal. Not wanting to find out what it was, they leave and call the cops, who come right back and start investigating the house, and they make a startling discovery in their bedroom. Wedged underneath the couple's bed was this 90-pound tiny little woman carrying a huge butcher's knife and a hypodermic needle. As they're taking this crazy lady away in handcuffs, one of the officers comes over to the couple and is like, so she was high on meth, and for at least 2 hours, she had been burrowing a hole in the underside of your mattress with that knife to get to you. Let this be a reminder that there really are monsters out there. In 2007, a woman living right near a prison in California got home late one night and went right to bed. Around midnight, she woke up to footsteps on her first floor, assumed it was her roommate, so she goes downstairs to say hi. She yells out to her roommate, who doesn't say anything, and then in walks this giant man who she doesn't recognize. She runs upstairs, jumps in her closet into the crawl space, and hides. As she's helplessly tucked away in this little crawl space, trying not to make any sound, all she hears is this giant man sprinting around her house, running into walls, flipping furniture, and screaming in frustration because he can't find her. Finally, after several hours, she slowly opens the crawl space back up, crawls out, and gets her phone off the nightstand and calls police. As she's telling the police her story, she describes the person who had broken in, and they stop her and say, ma'am, go back in the crawl space and stay there. We'll be there as soon as we can. It turned out a 6'11" convicted murderer had escaped the prison and was still on the loose. This is why you should never live next to crazy people. In 2015, a girl who was totally fed up with her noisy neighbors finally worked up the courage to go over there and tell them to be quiet. She knocks on the door, and out walks this insane-looking old woman who just starts hissing at her. And she doesn't stop hissing at her until the girl finally just leaves. She considers calling the police, but ultimately just goes back to her room and goes to bed. But she wakes up a couple hours later when she hears that same hissing sound. Her first thought is, there's no way this can be my neighbor, because she had her door locked. But then she notices there's a big lump right next to her in her bed, and she reaches over to check who it is. Her crazy neighbor leaps out of bed and runs into the closet. This is why you should never talk to strangers. In the early 2000s, a young girl was waiting outside her friend's house peeling the bark off of a tree when a strange man approaches her. As he got closer, she could see that he was grinning ear to ear and his face was white as a ghost. He walks right up to her and pinches her on the arm and says, "How would you like it if I peeled your skin off?" Just then, her friend's mom yells for her to come inside, and the man walks away. It would be years before the girl's mother would finally tell her who this man really was. Her friend's mom had seen the man pinch her on the arm and had immediately called the police, who quickly rounded this guy up. Plastered all across the inside of his van were dozens of pictures of this girl. But what they found in his storage locker is straight out of a nightmare. In the locker was a chair with hand and arm restraints. Next to it was an anatomy book and hundreds of torture tools. This is why you should always look under the toilet seat before you sit down. In 2003, over a 5-day period in London, 3 women showed up to hospitals with the same mysterious symptoms. They say they woke up with these horrible bite marks on the backs of their legs, and then while they're at the hospital, they become paralyzed and die. Despite their similar symptoms, the women had nothing in common except that they had recently been to the same pub. Authorities immediately shut it down and do a thorough search inside of the pub, but can't find anything deadly, until one of the detectives goes to use the pub's bathroom. As he's about to sit down, he thinks he sees something moving in the toilet, so he gives it a little kick. Hiding in the toilet was one of the world's largest and most poisonous spiders, the Brazilian wandering spider, and now they needed to catch it. This is why you should be careful what you put in the mail. In 2015, a man was asked by his neighbor to collect his mail while he was gone for a few weeks. A few days later, a large package arrives on his neighbor's front porch. The man can barely lift it, but gets over to his garage where he accidentally drops it and hears something break inside. Hoping his neighbor would think the damage occurred en route, he closes his squeaky garage door and forgets about it. But over the next couple of days, whatever was in that package started to smell so bad that he decides to open it up. Inside were two very important finds: his neighbor, who was dead, and a camera that was still recording. The police bring the man in for questioning and show him what was on the camera inside the box. It starts with his neighbor talking to the camera about how excited he is to mail himself home for his YouTube channel. Then, police fast forward to the very end where they see that the neighbor is now sleeping in the box, and then suddenly gets dropped and you hear a crack, and that's his neck breaking. And then you hear a squeaky garage door close.